Alrighty, guys, welcome. We may have to, if you guys ask questions, I'll have to have you get close to the microphone. I'm getting a little bit of feedback, but we'll just go from there. All right, my name's Seth. I actually am the head brewer over at Wooden Legs Brewing Company. We're a small craft brewer. We have a three-barrel system, and we can make about 90 gallons of beer every time we turn it on. We use raw grain, raw material, and we make all of the beers ourselves there. So what we're going to talk today about is about the importance of malting and grain itself in the process. Of course, in brewing, we have water, hops, barley, and then the yeast. Um, Today we'll just focus on the barley. What I'm going to do is I've got a little bit of a presentation. It's kind of short, but we can at least discuss the parts that we need to. I'll share it with you guys, and you guys let me know if you can see that. How's that?
This is something.
All right, we'll get her over here. Got it there? Not yet.
Not yet.
All right, one more time.
There we go.
There it is.
There we go.
All right, when we talk about barley, or actually more importantly, when we talk about malt in the brewing process, we are talking about barley. Two major types of barley that are used in the brewing process are either 6-row or 2-row barley. We're going to discuss a little bit about the differences between the two. We'll talk a little bit about barley growing areas, some of the varieties and when it's grown. We'll get real quick into the structure of the barley kernel, how the malting process works, how germination works, and changes in the barley during the malting process. So maybe the first thing to mention is that barley was cultivated as one of the first grains, actually the first agricultural product, one of the first agricultural products in the history of the world. It was believed to be first put together and cultivated in the Fertile Crescent, which is present day like Palestine, Syria, and Iran. There are people that believe the barley itself was the reason that the human race went from hunters and gatherers to an agrarian society and actually stopped long enough to plant these plants throughout many seasons. So there are some historians that believe that barley was actually more effective on the outcome of the human race than any of the other things. And they also believe that barley was grown as a component to beer as opposed to bread. Some of the historians originally thought that the barley was used for bread, but there's been evidence that predates the use of barley as beer to bread itself. So why do brewers use barley? I mean, there's a lot of things that we could ferment. There's a lot of starches out there. There's a lot of sugars out there. The reason the barley is so important is that it has a really key relationship between the proteins and the enzymes and the starches that live within it. I mean, it's just naturally kind of made for this. The enzymes that exist in barley are really the best thing you can possibly use in the brewing. So as a quick preview of what's happening later, enzymes are key because they give the barley the ability to take the starches that are all bound up and nice and tight and convert them down into sugars, which ultimately the sugars are what we want to go after with our yeast to produce ethyl alcohol, flavors, and other things. So barley is a really good plant, but some people might say, well, wheat has a lot of these same components. The difference is that wheat loses its grain or loses its husk during the malting process. So we actually want that husk to be part of the plant when it goes into the brew house because that acts as a natural filter bed during our process. So we could use wheat, but it becomes impractical at high percentages in the actual beer grist and actual grain makeup, because it becomes really hard and it becomes sticky in a lot of the situations. So barley just happens to be the plant that seems to work the absolute best. Even when other people use or are making other types of alcohol, including like moonshine or something. Somebody maybe they use malted corn in moonshine. They use malted barley a lot in part of that fermentation, just because the starches are exist within the barley, and those starches actually can break down. It has so much. Or excuse me, I used the wrong word. The enzymes are so high in the barley that the enzymes can basically be loaned to other starches to break those down. So here's the two different types of barley that we use in the malt. We use 2-row and 6-row. The 6-row has smaller seeds, and the 2-row has fewer seeds. That's larger seeds. That's the obvious way to think of this. If you were to look right down the barrel of these, you could actually see the rows of seeds. The 2-row has a higher enzyme content, or excuse me, 6-row has a higher enzyme content, so if you, per pound, it has a higher diastatic power. Diastatic power is what the brewer uses to identify how much this particular barley has the ability to break down the starches within itself and also within other starches that you would have been brewing with. So like a lot of the big brewers that you'd see advertising on Super Bowl Sunday, they use a lot of corn to fermentable. So they use a lot of 6-row barley because that barley has enough of the diastatic power to be able to break down the corn. There's also higher protein in 6-row. This could lead to a couple of problems: increased chill haze. If that protein continues through the entire process and ends up in your glass, it actually causes a haze. It's primarily grown in the U.S. We grow a lot of 6-row here. 2-row is what I actually use. The seeds are larger. It does have lower enzyme content, meaning that it doesn't have a lot of extra enzymes or a lot of extra diastatic power to break down any of the other starches we would throw in there. That's okay for what we use because we don't throw a lot of additional starches into our beer. The yield in the extract on the 2-row is higher. So that means I can get more fermentable sugar per pound on a 2-row than I could on a 6-row variety. Again, I have lower enzyme power, but even on a 2-row variety, it has a sufficient amount of enzymes to break down its own starches. But I do have some limitations using 2-row when I use other fermentables. And so in the slide here, you see it is more fermentable per pound. So per dollar per pound of barley, I actually can get more beer, more fermentation. It actually is more expensive as well, and that probably comes to just the fact that you have to use less of it as well. Where does barley like to be grown? It needs to be in a well-drained clay, sand, organic matter. You want a pH between 6 and 6.5. Barley really does not like heavy clay soil or light sandy soil. The heavy clay soil becomes too fertile, and you can actually get the barley will grow too big, and it will mess up the protein ratio down the barley, which actually would completely mess up the brewing process. If you actually get too fertile of a barley plant, it won't be maltable. The malter will reject it, and it will be now feed barley. What do you guys think? Any questions so far? Yeah, I can't quite hear you from the back, so you might have to scoot up front if you're going to.
So, I'm having trouble kind of hearing you. Why is it again that you choose a 2 over the 6?
So the 2-row barley has more fermentable sugars per pound than the 6-row. So when you're a small brewer like me, we really want to get the most sugar per pound because of our small batches. Whereas the 6-row barley, it doesn't have as much fermentables per pound, but it has a lot more of the enzymes. So that if you were to throw corn or unrefined sugars or starches like potatoes or some type of starch into the mash, the 6-row barley has enough enzymes that it would actually be able to break those starches down into fermentable sugars. And like Anheuser-Busch does this a lot. They use a lot of 6-Pro because they use a lot of corn in their beers. And that corn is then broken down because of the excess enzymes in the 2-Row. As a small craft brewer down here in Dickens, we don't use a lot of corn or any of those other fermentables in our beers, so we stick with the 2-Row. Good question. It's coffee, not beer, so you guys know. So here's where we grow it. You see there's not a whole bunch grown in South Dakota. I guess there is some in the upper Northwest. A lot of this is grown in Montana. A ton of it is grown in North Dakota. And then it goes up into Saskatchewan is where a lot of the growing goes on. You know, agriculture is not a guaranteed business in any way, but malting barley is really more dangerous because you could plant barley in the planting season and hope that by the time you go to harvest it that it's of a high enough quality that the maltster will take it. And if you miss your proteins or you miss your moisture levels, the maltster may look at it and say, we can't do anything with this. It turns into feed barley, which is significantly less. You know, in terms of what you can get for it. Other regions of the world, Canada grows a ton of barley. Russia, of course, grows a ton of barley. China has started to grow their own barley. Chinese barley they don't actually export; they just use that for internal consumption. And then, of course, some of the great beer nations of the world are known for their barley production, including Germany and England, the Czech Republic, those types of places. Turkey has some as well. So let's just talk about the factors that are important for both the farmers and the maltster. Of course, when they go to select the barley, they want a barley with high yield. Obviously, we want to get as much as we can per planted acre. They want a disease-resistant, they want a disease-controlled barley. They want a short growing period, and they want a strong straw strength on it. One of the things that barley can do, it has the tendency to become top-heavy, and you can get it to lay down in the field, and that's not exactly what you want. It's not easy to harvest. The maltster, though, is interested because they actually want a big plump kernel. They want about as big a kernel as you can get. Still not have your straw drop to the ground. They're interested in your protein levels, your enzyme, and the word they use is modification. And modification is the ability for the starches within the barley to get converted into sugars. And there's a scale and there's a way to figure out how modified the barley is. Of course, methods of producing malt include cluster breeding, mutation, and genetic engineering. There's a lot of different ways to try to get a new barley variety. The American Malting Barley Association is kind of the gatekeeper for most of these. It's usually a 10-year project to obtain the American Malting Barley Association recommends for new malting barley. The process starts by crossing in the greenhouse up to increased larger batches and finally into plant scales and trials in 9 years. It's quite a long time to develop a new variety of barley. Most of the barley that they're going to never really makes it past the test stages, and the AMBA makes a decision on recommending varieties for malting to the industry based on field growth and malting trials and everything else. So I guess the key here is that it doesn't go to market real easy, especially new varieties of barley. So here's a barley kernel cut in half. We're not going to get too much into science, but there you go. We're looking at it under a microscope. So here's the malting process. So the malting process, as we mentioned, is really the beginning stages to turn grain into. Sorry, I was getting feedback there. The malting process is anything that takes the starches and converts it into sugars. So what we need to do with that is we need to first take the grain out of the field. We're going to receive that in. It's going to be cleaned and stored. Once it arrives at the maltster station, we're going to steep it in water. There's heavy water or oxygen-rich water. This will get the plant to begin to germinate. It will begin to grow. once it grows to a certain level, they stop the germination process by drying it out and heating it up. You can then kiln it to make to pull out different flavors. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of ways and flavors we can pull out of the malt just by changing the heat level, moisture level, and how long we heat it. All the way from caramel malts to dark malts, lots of different ways to get flavor out of those. Then you need to dress it, store it, and ship it, and that's the very short version of the malting process. There's two big maltsters in the U.S. There's multiple, two that we get beer malt from are Breeze out in Chilton, Wisconsin, and there's one over in Shakopee. I forget I'll think of it here. That's over in Shakopee. Raw malting is what it was. Here's the malt going in the malt house. This is what's going into a steeping tank. Again, they make it full of water, full of oxygen, so the barley thinks that it's spring and ready to grow. And then they dry it out. The traditional malt houses do what this next slide is showing, and that's floor malting. This is still done for Scotch, for single malt Scotch in Scotland. Is they basically take it once it's wet and ready to go, they'll take it and roll it out onto this floor, and they will go through and rake it to turn it to keep the oxygen to it and keep the moisture content right, and it will germinate or malt on the floor here. This is actually a pretty cool process. If you watch some of the time-lapse videos out there, they show the guys with shovels shoveling it. It's pretty artisan to get it exactly right, but they've been doing it for hundreds of years in Scotland, so they're some of the best in business. Here's an automated system that does the same type of thing. It's turning the barley as it's beginning to grow. Again, this is all just to make sure that you don't get hot spots in the barley, that you make sure your moisture content is even across the entire batch of barley. Make sure your oxygen content is even, just so that it all grows kind of at the same time. So here's what it looks like as it malts. So you got it in your heating day 4. This is about when the maltster would stop the barley plant. This is when they would dry it out and roast it off, and then they'd kiln it. If they'd like to, kiln it or roast it to whatever intensity of flavor they want, and then it's packaged on. So that's the short version of the malting process. I will we'll go back to the camera here. Alrighty, any questions now? That was the 16-minute summary of brewing and
He's got a question for you here.
you got it.
All right, what kind of products can we look for if we want a good beer? What kind of stuff do you guys make?
Okay. So, beer in general falls into 2 categories. We've got ales and lagers. Ales are traditionally British style. They're a top fermenting, warmer yeast, have a lot more of the ale or beer flavors. Lagers are a lot of the, they're a different style of yeast that actually ferments cooler, and they get a lot of cleaner flavors. We do both types, but I think our brewery is more, I'll just say it, I like ales more, so we make more of those. So we have a couple different ales. We make a stout, and the stout, the barley that we use there, it's really kind of interesting, is that we use roasted barley in there, which is not malted at all. That's very traditional to to Irish stouts, is that they would want some of those dark roasted flavors, but they didn't want to pay the maltster. They didn't want to go through the expense of having it malted before they used it. So the brewers would take the malt, or excuse me, they would take the grain in directly from the farmers. They would kiln it off and roast it themselves, and then they would use it in their final product. And that gives a very assertive, dry flavor, which is very synonymous with Guinness. So one of the trademarks of Guinness is the roasted barley taste. If you use that in a high enough percentage, you actually get some astringent and almost some burnt characters to it. So if you use in the lower amount of your total grain, you actually can get just a red tint. It'll contribute some of those roasting flavors, but it more tints the beer red, And that's what an Irish red is. So an Irish red is very similar to an Irish stout because they use roasted barley, but the Irish red uses a lot lower percentage of the roasted barley. So the two of the beers that we make a 353 stout, which is 353 is the color code of Ireland. So if you were in Ireland, that would be the numbers you would dial. And then we make a beer called Little Red Top, and that happened to be my CD handle when I was a kid. My grandpa was Big Red Top, and I was Little Red Top, so we made a Little Red Top Irish Red. So we'll have those around. Some of the other really good malts that I like to use are actually German-based, where if the English malts have like the caramels and even the roasted chocolates. Some of the German malts are like Munich-style malts, and they have similar qualities, but actually you can taste the difference between how the final roasting process and actually the process in general goes through on the malt. Now it's just regionalized. So if we're going to make a German-style like Bock beer, as opposed to like an English-style barley wine or even an English-style brown ale, we would use some of those German malts because they have some characteristics, including acidity that comes through, including some residual sweetness that comes through, that really lend themselves well to using the malts of the country of origin of the beer style that we're trying to make. So I would say if you guys ever have a chance to come to the pub, it's fun because we can show you the entire process. We've got an entire grain room full of different malts and different ingredients, but all of those ingredients blended at the right temperatures and at right concentrations can produce a whole series of beers.
I got a question for you too.
Where do you guys usually source most of your grain from at your guys' brewery?
I go through a distributor, and he has a lot of different malts available to him. I go through what's called Country Malt Group. They have a parent company that's actually called Great Western Malting, and that's out of Portland, I want to say. But in addition to their own malts, they carry the malts from Grace out of Wisconsin, and I don't believe they carry any of the malts out of Shakopee. But they do actually carry malts that are still floor malted over from Scotland, and they've got some British malts, and they've got some German malts. So I go through them for most of the malting. They buy at quantity, like most distributors do, and allow us to buy 50-pound bags or those types of things at a lower rate than it would be if I tried to just buy them directly from a maltster exact bag directly. So when we start making more than 50-pound bags at a time, then maybe we'll change it up. But our batch of beer usually need to make approximately 100 gallons of beer. We're at 150 pounds to 200 pounds of malt. I mean, it's kind of the rough magnitude. Most of that malt is base malt. So let's say 80% of it, 75% of it is just pale ale malt. So it's the most basic malt that you can get. It has the highest amount of fermentables. It has probably the least amount of flavor contribution. The other 25% of the malt is like chocolate malt or caramel malts or biscuit or victory malts. These are all malts that actually will tease different flavors out of the beer. As you roast off a malt, the maltster may build flavors into it, but you're also going to kill a lot of the fermentables, so you're not going to have as much of the actual fermentables for your finished beer. Question?
Anybody else have anything for me? How much does you guys' beer cost?
We charge at the bar $5 a pint. And then, depending on how, we have to go through a distributor. In the state of South Dakota, let's say I wanted to send a beer to Watertown. I would have to sell it to an individual that drives it to Sioux Falls, and then in turn drives it to Watertown to sell to the accounts there. And just as the liquor laws and stuff are organized in South Dakota, that's just how it works. We've been going to sell down the street here in Brookings. So what they actually charge for one of our kegs, of course, it has a distribution markup, but I think the bar at the end of the day would pay anywhere from 75 to 100 bucks for 5 gallons. So it's pretty comparable with the pricing you would get for other craft beers in the region and in the nation. We'll never ever, no craft beer producer will ever be able to get to the to the numbers or get to the margins that like Budweiser and Miller, those guys do. They probably like literally spill more beer off their bottling line than I'll make this year. And so they have economies of scale, so they get to order truckloads, and they actually malt their own grain themselves, so they actually can control that process, they control that cost. So craft beer that you're going to get will range anywhere from $5 a pint to $10 a pint. Some craft beer out there is at up to 12%. In the state of South Dakota, we can brew it up to 12% alcohol by volume before we have to get a different license. So 12% beer is, about 3 or 4 times what you would drink as a regular, Sunday afternoon football beer or something. So there's different price ranges through all of them. But if you come down to the pub there in Brookings, we sell all of our beers at $5 a pint. Good question. You guys been over to the brewery in Watertown there?
Dempsey's, I've been there a couple times, but Leon was asking how long it takes to go from the time where you start putting a batch together to the time that it's ready to start drinking.
Good question. Grain to glass. So from when we actually turn on the brew house and get it fired up, it's about an 8-hour day of brewing. Actually, the guys, I'm not in the brewery right now because they're working away and they're actually doing a batch. But once you turn on the brewery, it's 8 hours. Then you put it into the fermentation cycle. In the fermentation cycle, the actual primary, this is when the yeast is eating the sugars. That lasts anywhere from 4 days to 2 weeks, maybe a touch longer. And then you let it basically rest for another 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the style. And then you carbonate it up and drink it. So you can drink beer, some of the beers that we make in as little as 4 weeks. Some of the other beers we may take maybe 2 or 3 months. Lagers sometimes even take longer. Longer lagers can take up to 6 months, and big lagers will take up to a year. So it depends on what you're going to do. We drink a lot of ale, so from grain to glass, we kind of give the 4 to 6 week estimate any time that we do it. You can drink it earlier, I suppose, but it tastes a lot better once you let it rest and get carbonated and everything like that. Like you'll have alcohol and CO2 in your beer within days of brewing it, but it takes a while for some of the flavors and some of the other things to sediment out and balance and all those things.
Anything else? Looks like their curiosity is satisfied there, Seth.
There you go. Come on down to Brookings sometime. I'll show you how it goes. Like, we give tours all the time, so it's fun to talk about here, but it's a lot more fun to just eat the grain and to see how it all works out. But happy to do it, guys. If you guys have another course or something you want me to just we've got yeast and all kinds of fun stuff that goes into the brewing process. But good luck with your studies, and we'll catch you guys later.
Thank you. See ya.